Good morning, everybody. I'm Stella Collins, and I'm the chair for this morning's first sort of breakout session. I'm really lucky because I get to chair the lovely Will Thalheimer, and Will's going to introduce himself in a moment. Will's a hero of mine. He's very, very focused on evidence-based learning and runs something really fantastic called the Debunkers Club, and I'm sure he's probably going to tell you a little bit more about that. My job, first off, is to ask you to think about this bridge that Don talked about earlier on. So I just want you to have a think. What's brought you to this session? What are you hoping to get out of it? It might just be, and that's fine with us, Will, isn't it? It just might be you walk away with some new learning. But just for a moment, have a think about what you want to get out of this session, what's brought you along, and tell the person next to you. On your left.
That's not going to work because one person goes to the left, one goes to the right.
They'll work it out.
They'll figure it out.
Okay, that's really great. We've got you all talking. Just to make sure we give Will his turn too. So I realize my plan of getting you all to turn to the left probably didn't work that well. But you all managed to get it sorted. So let's just hear from 2 or 3 people. One idea that you want to get out of this session. Somebody? How do you know that something's been successful? So by the end of this, you'd like to have some ideas about that. Fantastic, thank you.
For me, I'd like a better way to judge kind of understanding in a kind of non-biased way, not just like, oh yeah, I understand it better.
For the learner to understand how the learner understands. Fantastic.
Benchmarking, get new media for learners, 3D animations, whatever, before, after, impact, how we can get that.
Okay, so how do you benchmark what they have learned? Marvelous. Well, there's some stuff for you to start with. Will? I'm going to hand over to you.
All right, thank you, Stella. And thanks for all your organizing work. Let's give a big hand to Stella Collins. All right. All right, I am delighted to be here. I love this conference. It's my 3rd year here. I love talking about learning. I love talking about learning evaluation. But let's start with the honest truth. And that is, learning evaluation is something that is sort of like the ugly stepchild in our field. Sometimes we do it. And when we do it, sometimes, many times, we don't sort of like what we're doing. We're not sure of it. We're a little frustrated. We're not happy with it. We wish it could be better. And I'm going to show you some evidence of that. And it's really complicated. So that's one of the things we have to start with right away. Learning evaluation is a very complex subject matter. Think about this. Human beings, we're talking about human learning. Human beings are really complicated, complex creatures. You put learning on top of that, and then you put learning evaluation on top of that. When we talk about learning evaluation, we can talk about all types of things. We can talk about, do they comprehend? Do they understand? Do they remember? Are they motivated to apply? Do they actually apply? Are they successful if they apply? Do they get the results that we expect? Do they get the results that they expect? On and on and on and on. For me, I've been thinking about learning evaluation for about a decade or so. And I have to say, I still feel that there's so much for me to learn. Today, what I'm going to talk about is transforming evaluation, and particularly two things. I'm going to talk about happy sheets, how to make them better, and I'm going to introduce the Eltham learning evaluation model. I introduced it for the first time last year here, and I'm going to give you a little introduction to it because Don Taylor asked me to do that, so I'm going to do that for you. So one of my goal for you today, because we only have like a little more than an hour, my goal for you is to make you curious, to want to learn more, okay? I'm going to hopefully be a little bit provocative, get you thinking about some things you haven't thought about, but, and then my hope is that you'll be curious enough to want to take it further. So with that, I've designed this presentation to have a bunch of URLs in it, so you can look for articles if you're interested to learn more. And the slides will be up at this website by the end of today. They're not up there now. But they'll be up there, and I will show you this link later as we go forward. So let's start out thinking about the big picture of evaluation. And what I'm going to do, I'm not going to start with us, because it could be too personal for us, make us a little nervous. Let's start with a farmer, okay? So this farmer's out in the field. You can see he's got his tablet there, gathering data. Why is he doing that? Why would he be gathering data? Not just to be a techie, right? He's doing it for a reason. And the reason is probably that he wants to be able to make good decisions. His most important decisions, the most important decisions for his organization. Okay, and what kind of criteria would he have for this data? Well, probably things like it should be accurate and valid, it should be relevant, it should be highly predictive, cost effective, and I'm going to emphasize this again, it should help his organization make its most important decisions. Okay, so now with that introduction about the farmer, everybody needs data no matter what field they're in. Let's look at ourselves. Here we are, and not all of us dress as nicely or are well coiffed, but there we are. And we have probably the same goals for our data collection to help us make our most important decisions. What are those? Well, here's some of the ones that I think they are. You probably can add your own. I'll just let you read those. We do evaluation for a reason, not just because somebody tells us to. We should do it for a reason to take better actions to make better decisions. Okay, so this is sort of an introduction. I want you to sort of think about this as we go forward here today. Let me introduce myself now a little bit so you'll know where I'm coming from on this, because I have a particular angle that I take. Work Learning Research is my research and consulting firm. I had my 20th anniversary of doing this last year. Very excited. What I've tried to do from the beginning is to bridge the gap between the research side and the practice side. There's wisdom on both camps. I do basically three things: consult, educate, and evaluate. And I do this for a number of varied organizations, from folks like the Navy SEALs to Oxfam, war to poverty, getting rid of poverty, National Park Service, World Bank, CDC, also small little e-learning shops, startups that you've never heard of, universities like MIT, trade organizations, et cetera. And what I try to bring to this is a research-based perspective. So for most of those 20 years, I've read over 200 articles from the scientific referee journals on learning, memory, and instruction, and then I try to translate that research into practical recommendations. So I don't come at evaluation as a data scientist or a mathematician or a statistician or a psychometrician. I come at learning evaluation as a learning guy, someone who's focused on learning. To me, if we don't use the wisdom from learning to design our evaluations, we're missing some critical element. So I take this research, I sometimes write research to practice reports that are available at that URL. They're all free. In 2007, I started writing about evaluation. And then 2 years ago, I published this book, Performance Focused Smile Sheets. I'm going to share today the wisdom from that and from what I've learned in the 2 years since working with clients. And I'm also going to introduce the Eltham model as we go forward. So I have a truckload of information. It's going to be coming at you really fast. Here we go. Are you ready? All right. Let's start out with a question about learning, not about learning evaluation, just to get us warmed up thinking about learning. When designing learning, should we base our learning methods on the preferences of our learners? And our answer choices are, learners are fairly good judges of their own learning, so we should trust their learning design intuitions. Learners are not often good judges of their own learning, so we should utilize other learning factors. Or C, learners are sometimes good judges, sometimes poor judges of their own learning. So turn to the person next to you, tell them what answer you're going to choose, and you've got 10 seconds to do it. So 10 seconds for each of you and 10 seconds to sort of get ready, turn your chair, etc. Go. All right. I just want to point out Michael's shoelaces. Can you show them for everyone? Beautiful, huh? And coordinated with the color of the conference and his shirt. Oh. Michael Cook, ladies and gentlemen. All right. All right. He tried to distract me, but even though he did that, and those of you who've seen me in my workshops and my presentations know that I have telepathic powers. And I'm guessing that most of you chose answer C. Am I right? Yeah, see, I still got it, despite your trying to distract me. All right, so let's get rid of C here. If you had to choose between A and B, which would you do? Will, Dr. Thalheimer, why are you making me do this? It's too hard. You're going to have to do it anyway, all right? And by the way, I'm an American, so I forgot to do this, but in advance, I know I have to follow GDPR rules, so I want you to know if you raise your hand, you are consenting to have your data collected. And we're not doing it intentionally, but the camera may pick it up. So just want you to know, all right? So you ready to choose A or B? All right, how many choose A? Okay. And how many choose B? Oh, man, it's like exactly 50-50. Ooh, controversy. I like that. Okay. I'll show you some research on this later. We'll come back to it. All right, when we talk about evaluation in the learning space, in the workplace learning field, we have to start with the dominant model, the Kirkpatrick 4-level model. I am going to refer to it as the Kirkpatrick-Cassell 4-level model because it turns out Raymond Cassell was the originator of that. And if you want to read a brilliant piece of investigative journalism, you can go to that URL. Yes, I wrote it, okay. So here's what some researchers think about the model. This is a research review in a top-tier scientific refereed journals. It's a great research review. But if you don't like reading research reviews, you can go to this URL and read my review of the research review. But this is what they said. The Kirkpatrick framework has a number of theoretical and practical shortcomings. It is antithetical to nearly 40 years of research on human learning, leads to a checklist approach to evaluation, and by ignoring the actual purpose for evaluation, risks providing no information of value to stakeholders. Another top-tier journal, Kirkpatrick's framework is not grounded in theory, and the assumptions of the model have been repeatedly disproven over the past 25 years. Very recent. Okay, so our dominant model, even though there's benefits, has some chinks in its armor. And the truth is that learning evaluation is really hard. And we've known it's been hard for a long time. And I'm going to sort of take you through a history of learning evaluation, starting with what Donald Kirkpatrick said in 1960. The evaluation of training programs in terms of results is progressing at a very slow rate. 2 decades later, Rob Brinkerhoff, another evaluation innovator, said, with some notable exceptions, relatively little work has been devoted to making evaluation more useful and worthwhile. In 2007, in some research I was involved in with the e-learning guild, we asked people, are you able to do the measurement you want to do? And only 20% said they were. This is Towards Maturity. They did a global study of L&D leaders And 97% of them, almost all of them, said they want to improve the way they gather and analyze data on learning impact. This is some recent research just out in the last few months from the e-learning guild that I worked with. We asked, in general, are you able to do the learning measurement you want to? Only 52%, over half, said, no, I wish we could substantially change what we're doing now. So you can see there's this long history of frustration. If you're a guild member, you can go get that article, or you can get an executive summary. A few months ago, I started compiling like the common mistakes we make in learning evaluation, and I came up with 54, and you can get those there. So we've had this long issue, and I'm going to emphasize again that that's okay in some sense because this learning evaluation stuff is really hard. It's really hard. We can't expect perfection. Okay, question for you. This is Hendrik, and this is Sandra. And Hendrik has been Chief Learning Officer for 3 months and had begun to wrest control of the thrashing octopus that was his company's learning and development department. He started by getting learning evaluation under control based on the dictum that we have heard in the management business literature for many years. What gets measured gets managed. So the first pilot was with the strategically important Leadership for High Potentials course. The new evaluation strategy involved the following: improving the evaluation questions asked of learners by getting rid of the old questions and only asking questions that target level 3, work improvement, and level 4, organizational impact. Adding a Net Promoter Score, NPS question, which asks learners to rate the likelihood that they would recommend the learning intervention to their coworkers. So, what do you think? Sandra, who's a world-class learning evaluation expert, will tell Hendrik about the effectiveness of his evaluation design. And we'll give you 4 choices. So, find a few people you want to talk to about this, and then we'll take a vote. Okay? You don't have to all vote together. It's better if you wrangle a little bit, fight each other. It's more fun for me. So, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do this. Go. All right, here we go. So it is time. It is time to make a public commitment to one of these choices. All right, so we'll just take a quick vote. How many people think that this is not at all effective? Okay. How many people think it's somewhat effective? Ooh, that looks like a majority. Mostly effective? All right, few. Very effective. All right, nobody likes it all. Okay. Yeah, all right, thank you. All right, good. It's good to have variety. All right. All right, we're going to come back to this. All right, so I start all my measurement workshops with this idea that there's no perfect measurement tool. I really like this quote from Deborah Bandelos in her book last year. Our measures are not perfect, but they should instead be thought of as approximations. So with that, I'd like to get your opinion on your organization's happy sheets or smile sheets or learner feedback questions or whatever you want to call them. There's many names. And if you don't have an organization you're working with, think in general about all the organizations you've worked with, you've seen. And I've given you 2 sort of negative items, terrible and bad, and 2 positive ones, okay or good. So just like to get a sense of how you think your organization's happy sheets are how good they are. All right, so we'll start with the negative. How many people say they're terrible? Okay, how many people say they're bad? How many people say they're okay? And how many people say they're good? Because I'm not going to pick on you now. All right. We're not going to extremes today. That's good, especially in this era of political unrest. Don said, whatever you do, don't make any Brexit jokes. So, all right. He didn't say that. He should have said it, but he didn't. Okay, so if you're on the negative side, hopefully I'll give you some ideas for how you can make them better. If you're on the positive side, and most of you said okay, I'm probably going to challenge the way you think about your happy sheets and your learner survey questions. So here's the research. This is 2 meta-analyses, scientific studies of many other studies. And together, these looked at over 150 scientific studies, and they found a correlation between our smile sheet results and our learning results was 0.09. They both found the same thing. So if you, what statisticians tell us is that anything below 0.30 is considered a weak correlation. So 0.09 is virtually no correlation at all. So let me just make this very clear from a practical standpoint what this means. If you get high marks on your happy sheets, you could have a very good course, very effective, or almost equally likely a very ineffective course. If you get low marks, you could have a poorly designed course, or almost equally likely, you could have a well-designed course. With traditional smile sheets, we just can't tell. And this is true in university teaching as well. There are 0.20, again, a weak correlation. So there's something fundamental. There's some problem when we ask learners to evaluate with the typical kind of questions we've been asking them. One of the problems, it's just one of the problems, in causing us to have difficulty is that we tend to use Likert-like scales. So we give people a statement, and then we ask them whether they strongly agree with it, whether they agree, neither agree nor disagree, et cetera, and then we put a number on it. So strongly agree becomes a 5, agree becomes a 4, et cetera. Now, some test and evaluation experts, Sharon Schrock and Bill Coscarelli, said this: the resulting scale in the Likert-like scale is deficient in the response words, that's these over here, strongly agree, et cetera, are open to many interpretations. Now, what's interesting is that mathematicians, this is actually scary, not as much, more scary than interesting, but mathematicians and statisticians tell us we're not really allowed to take this nominal data, word-based data, and turn it into ordinal or interval data. We're not allowed. It's illegal, and yet it's the foundation of a lot of our learning evaluation that we do. We also, we're asking our learners for their opinions of the learning. We're asking for their insights on the learning. But research shows that learners don't always know their own learning. They don't know how learning works. In fact, there's 2 recent reviews that show that learners have a lack of knowledge of their own learning, of how learning works. So if we ask them for their ideas about designing the learning, some of those ideas may be good. A lot of those ideas may be poor or inadequate or ineffective. Remember I asked you this question? So the best answer is C, second best answer is B, and A is something we don't want to do. So if people tell you to take a learner-centric view in your design or your evaluation, be a little bit careful of that. So does this mean that we should ignore our learners? No, I don't think so. I think it means that we have to be very careful when we ask them questions, that we ask them questions that they can answer well, that they really have insights on, that we avoid bias, and we ask them questions that they can give us sort of some precision about. By the way, when I first saw this data here, I said to myself, wow, my first inclination was, well, should we even use these smile sheets? And at first I was like, nope, shouldn't use them. But then I thought, well, we're going to use them anyway. It's a tradition. It's respectful to ask people for their input. And it's important in many ways, right, what we get out of that. It's about the reputation. We need some of that information, sort of from a customer service standpoint. I did some research last year asked people, in your opinion, how useful is the data you get from your learner surveys in helping you improve your learning designs, learning delivery, and learning support? You can see most people said, in general, our data was somewhat useful or not very useful. Only about 15% said, in general, our data is very useful. So we know that our learner surveys are not doing as well as they could. Okay, so I'm going to take you on a journey I took in creating a better smile sheet. I've been out teaching for many years. I used to be a leadership trainer, and now for the past few years, I've been teaching workshops on learning design, et cetera. So this was my new smile sheet a number of years ago. I know you can't read this. I'm just showing you it was on 2 pages. I don't know if you can see my picture there. You can say I was a lot younger. I had a lot more hair back then. But I don't know if you can see. But I've been getting better looking over time. That's the good news. But I'm introducing this to you not because it was a brilliant design and not because it was a terrible design. Some things were good, some things were bad, but there were some lessons to be learned. All right, so I'm going to blow some of this up so you can read it. So one of the things I thought, okay, no, I turned it off. This is not user error. I don't want to distract them from what I'm about to say because it's really brilliant. If I can remember what it was I was going to say. What was it I was going to say? Yes, I remember. So we are learning experts, right? We know learning. One of the things we should know about learning is that learners forget. So I was thinking, oh my gosh, if I teach a one-day workshop and I ask people questions at 5 in the afternoon, a lot of what they're going to remember is between 4 and 5 in the afternoon and probably between 8:30 and 9:30 in the morning. And in the middle of the day, it could be pretty fuzzy. So my thought was, I should probably remind them about what they learned so that they can give me more accurate feedback. I was trying to support them in that. And so what I did was I gave them specific concepts. You can see I'm showing you 2 here, but there's typically 10 to 15. 2 common practices in measurement bias our results. Measuring learning at the end of the program may bias the results. Similarly, measuring learning in the learning context may bias the results. So I think that's good to help the learners, support them in answering the questions. I then asked, how valuable is the concept to you? And I don't like that question anymore. It's too fuzzy, how valuable, right? I also had them circle the value of the number on a numeric scale. And numbers are even more fuzzy than Likert-like questions. So I don't like that anymore. So some good, some bad. The other thing I thought, have you ever seen people on a paper-based smile sheet circle the same number all the way down? What's happening? They're not thinking, right? They're just zooming. So I thought, I really want to slow people down. I really want to get them thinking about this. So I asked them a question, and then I put a phrase in the middle, like average value or average. I'm thinking, my thought process was, okay, they're going to start thinking, oh, is this above average or below average? So I don't like the numbers, but I like the idea of slowing people down to get them to think. Because if we want their data to be accurate and to mean something, to get them to think about the questions would be a good thing. The other thing, I told you I was a leadership trainer. Well, I was a highly mediocre leadership trainer. And in fact, I was pretty bad in the beginning. I eventually got better. And one of the reasons I got better was reading the comments on my smile sheets. It wasn't the only reason, but one of the reasons. So these can be some of the most important things we do, is get comments. One of the mistakes we make is we give people very little room, whether it's a paper-based one or an electronic one, we give them a line or something. And what message does that send to people? We really don't want you to answer this question. So give them a lot of space. Some of the best question comes from comments. All right. So now I'm going to introduce performance-focused smile sheets. And before we get into there, I want to acknowledge something that's happened in our field over the past 10, 15, 20 years. Something that's really important, really amazing. And that is that the science of learning has really solidified behind some very strong recommendations. And this is evidenced by some top-tier books, some mainstream books, by some really good research review articles, and by the work of research to practice people that are in our field. This is Decisive Dozen, that's mine, but there's many people, well, I shouldn't say, there's a handful of people doing this now. There's Julie Dirksen, Patty Shank, Carl Kopp, Miriam Nealon, Clark Quinn, and others who are doing this kind of research to practice stuff. So obviously, this science of learning stuff is something we should use in our learning designs, right? Makes sense? But also, when we think about evaluation, we ought to inculcate some of the wisdom on learning into our learning evaluations as well. So, if we're thinking about how to create a great smile sheet, we probably have an ultimate goal, some primary goals, secondary goals, and tertiary third-level goals. So, 2 primary goals. Is the learning effective? Will the learning be effective in supporting on-the-job performance? And are the results actionable? Will the smile sheet results communicate with clarity and urgency to guide action? All right, and then our secondary goals, and this is going to be way too much information, just warning you, I'm going to simplify it, but okay. So basically, this is the science of learning factors that really matter. And the results actionable, there's 3 key goals. Are the questions well designed? Are we avoiding bias? Number 1. Number 2, are the learners making good smile sheet decisions? Have we supported them in that endeavor? And number 3, are the data we're getting clear and actionable? And let's compare that to what we typically get. We typically get a number. My course, my workshop is a 4.1. Okay, so that number, 4.1, it's a number, and what's happened is we're getting a bunch of numbers like that, but they all go from like 3.8 to 4.5. So there's no differentiation really, right? Where's the cutoff? How do we know? So we sort of get stuck and paralyzed, and then we don't do anything. It doesn't help us make our most important decisions. So, are we getting data that's clear and actionable? Now, our traditional smile sheets, they, on this whole map of things, they get at, are the learners engaged? Do they have a belief in the value of the concepts? They don't really focus on any of these other things. We'd have to add another column. And we'll just add it there. A traditional smile sheet, learners rate instructors as credible and engaging, classroom environment conducive to learning, learners satisfied with the experience, learners think course was well organized. But these things are so far removed, and by the way, quaternary is 4th level. I had to look that up. But just so you get a little education today. But these things are so far removed from our tertiary goals, our secondary goals, our primary goals. That's why our traditional smile sheets are not correlated with learning results. Now, this was in the book. I borrowed this and modified it based on the work of Rob Brinkerhoff. But there's a bunch of reasons for smile sheets. You can divide them into 3 categories. The reputation of the learner, that's where the learner satisfaction comes in. This is where traditional smile sheets focus. Supporting learners in learning, we can ask questions to do that. We typically don't do that very much. My focus is on focusing on the effectiveness of the learning to get a better sense of that. So now, what does a better smile sheet question look like? Well, here's one. And I'll tell you why I like it after I go through it. So, how able are you to put what you've learned into practice on the job? Choose one. I'm not at all ready to use the skills taught. I have general awareness, but will need more guidance to put the skills into practice. I need more hands-on experience. I'm fully competent. I'm capable at an expert level. So I like this for a bunch of reasons. Number 1, it's focused on something that's important on the job performance. Number 2, there's granularity between the answer choices. Okay, they're much less fuzzy. They help people think about them more than strongly agree versus agree. So people can, sort of get their head around it. In fact, there's basically 3 reasons why this granularity is so important, so valuable. Number 1, it helps the learners make the decision. It enables them to wrap their heads around what they're answering. Number 2, it's more motivating than a bunch of numbers or a bunch of strongly agrees, et cetera. And we want them to pay attention. We want their attention. And number 3, the data we can get from this looks and creates more urgency and clarity. The data we can get from this can look something like this. So let's say we have a course that's, our goal is to have people improve their skills, not just have awareness. And most of our people choose, we have awareness but need more guidance. Need more guidance can be more training, more coaching, okay? And so that would be probably an unacceptable result. These things are called standards, these words on here. We won't have time to talk about those much today, but they're important as well. Here's a question about motivation. In regard to the concepts taught in the course, how motivated will you be to utilize these skills in your work? I'll let you skim through those. So again, it's focused on something important. We know from the research on training transfer that learner motivation to apply what they've learned is critical. So it's focused on something important, and there's more granularity between the answer choices. A question about follow-through. After the course, when you begin to apply your new knowledge at your work site, which of the following supports are likely to be in place for you? Select as many items as are true. I'll have my progress monitored by my supervisor in applying the learning, someone available to coach or mentor me, easy access to a course instructor, job aids, I'll be periodically reminded, or I will not get much direct support but will rely on my own initiative. Again, focused on something important. We know from the research that after training, support is critical, and then there's granularity between the answer choices, very clear distinctions between them. Okay, Will, won't these questions, I'm not sure, these are different than the ones we've been giving our learners. I'm not sure they're going to like them. Well, I heard that in the beginning of doing this stuff, and my instinct was, what? Are you kidding me? Learners, when they see our typical smile sheet questions with numbers and Likert-like scales, they know at some unconscious or conscious level that the data we're getting is not that valuable. That's why they go so my instinct was that learners are going to like the new questions better. But now we have some data on this. Took this to 2 organizations, both global in scope, one a for-profit, one a not-for-profit, looked at 20 different courses in these organizations, very different soft skills, hard skills, all kind of things. And here were the results. The learners like the new questions better than the old. 80% of learners like the new questions better than the old questions. 90% said they like the new questions equal or better than the old questions. So only 10% didn't like them. So, and by the way, if you're going to try to motivate or persuade your stakeholders, this is some of the best data, and I can give that to you. Okay, so I've been talking about sort of forced choice questions, but I want to emphasize that open-ended questions can be some of the most valuable. Ask them a question about what's good, what's bad, and here's my secret question asked at the end. Not many people answer it, but the ones who do tend to give really pithy information, very valuable information. Is there anything else we should have asked about? Is there anything else you want to tell us? Okay, so in the book, I emphasize over and over again that smile sheet should only be one part of our learning evaluation strategy. It should not be our whole thing. That's one of the things we do. All right, so what message does this question send to our stakeholders, to our learners, to our instructors, to our business people, to our instructional designers, to everybody that's relevant? This sends a message that after training, support is important and that there might be some real supports that can be valuable. Okay, so it sends some messages. These messages, I like to think of them in terms of sort of what the behavioral economists talk about nudging, pushing people, getting them to think about things they haven't thought about. Here's another question. This is for, in an online webinar or online meeting. Compared to most webinars or online meetings, how well did this session keep your attention to select one choice? And you can see the answer choices. What message does this send? It sends a message that keeping people's attention in an online meeting or a webinar is critically important. What about this? This was from a conference evaluation forum. The ISPI is a U.S. trade association, and, well, it's international, I guess, but based in the U.S. And they wanted to ask some questions on a conference evaluation forum. And you can see they have 2 questions related to research. And I did help them with this, but they wanted to make sure that they were sending a message about their brand. Their brand is about rigor and high quality information, and they want to emphasize to their speakers and to their members what their brand is. Now you can take this as a hint or an idea. What brand do you want your learning and development department to have in the eyes of your learners and your business stakeholders? These kind of performance-focused questions have been used not only in classroom training, but in e-learning, in conference evaluation forms, self-study learning programs, even in an employee exit survey. So, what questions do you have? I know I threw a lot out at you, but what questions do you have about these at this point in time? Yes?
You went through a couple of different type of questions, but the first one that you went through was around understanding, and you gave I don't understand this at all, I need more guidance, I don't remember what the second one was. I need practice, I think it was,
Yeah, a bunch of things, yeah.
My question with that, though, is because the first option is pretty clearly negative. The top two, the fourth one and fifth one, are pretty positive, and then I'm a genius, which is like the equivalent on a Likert scale of a 4 and a 5 and a 1. So would you do a comparative test to see if people just kind of got into the pattern of saying like, well, I don't really know what 2 means because I don't know what guidance is, so I'm just going to choose 2 because I don't know,
Well, so remember this. The baseline is we're not aiming for perfection. We can't create perfection. So one way to think about it is it more concrete, and can people wrap their heads around it more than strongly agree versus agree? And that's clearly yes. The other thing, and you're raising a very important point, is it's critical to do a bunch of things to improve our question choices. In fact, the wording of that question, I've improved it after that, and I'm going to give you a link to that as well. And one of the things I found was, one of the things, there's a couple things here. So one is we need a good process. So an iterative process where, and you have to have humility about this. So you create a question and you let it, a bunch of questions, and you let them sit for a couple of days, then you look at them again. Because when you first write them, you think, oh, these are great. And I do this. I'm pretty good at this now, but I look at them, I come back and I go, oh, what was I thinking? So that's one thing. Second thing is get other people's input, okay? Ideally, you'd like to actually get the target audience's input as well. Do some think aloud protocols, et cetera. But then also you want to pilot test them. And test them out and see what kind of range of responses you get. Because you're right, you don't want everybody to glom onto the same response. Another thing here, and the danger of going on too long about the details, the last choice, the question, I try to make that one difficult because I don't want people to get into the mindset of, oh, I'm supposed to choose all the topmost ones. I like my trainer, he's a good person, or she's a good person. I want to get them not to go off that. So I put one in there that's really kind of difficult. Okay, so that's some creating some range about that. Yes, you have a follow-up.
Yeah, that actually made me think, is it reasonable to just mix up the order entirely, put the most positive one as number 2, or is that really just going to screw with people?
That's going to screw with people. Yeah. There's sometimes when here's the recommendation. If there's an obvious continuum, keep it on the continuum. If there's not an obvious continuum, then you randomize the choices so there's no bias. And you want to put the negative ones first. There's research to show you put the negative ones first. Okay. Wow, we went deep into that. Yeah.
from these platforms before you actually start setting up learning interventions that you then use the happy sheets to measure. So because that's quite a new area emerging in L&D, I wonder if you started looking into that.
Okay, I'm going to give you a quick answer to this, but we could talk about this a long time. So the question was, what about performance? What about collecting performance data? And particularly, there's some new AI opportunities some machine learning opportunities. There's a bunch of opportunities there that maybe give us some insights. The key thing is to know whether we're collecting the data that's relevant. Oftentimes we collect data that's easy to collect and not necessarily the data that's important to collect. And because it's hard, you know, think about a leader in an organization, a manager. When he or she, what's the most important thing they're doing, right? They're talking, they're interacting with their direct reports. How are we going to be able to capture the tone of voice, the body language, the way they make people feel? That's really difficult, but that's important. We can capture other things easier, like the performance rating they give people. But is that really, on those things, which are more important? There's a great book, I'll recommend it to you. It's called The Tyranny of Metrics. By Jerry Muller, M-U-L-L-E-R. Brilliant book. It really gives us some skepticism about measuring. Okay, because we have more to go, I'm willing to hang out and answer your questions later, but I want to keep going. I'm going to want to get your assessment of this. What do you think of this question as a happy sheet question? And our answer choice, you can say it's good, okay, or bad. All right, just a quick, gut response. Raise your hand. How many of you think it's pretty good? Okay. How many people think it's okay? And how many people are refusing to answer my questions anymore? How many people think it's bad? Okay, so my interpretation of it is because it's a Likert-like scale, it's bad. Now the STEM, you might go somewhere with that, but because it's Likert, it's bad. What about this one? How ready are you to write scenario-based questions? Circle one or more answers and write your reasoning below. Still not sure where to begin. I know enough to get started. I can tell a good question from a bad one. I can write my own questions, but I'd like to get some feedback before using them. I can write my own questions, and I'm confident they will be reasonably well designed. And then there's sort of this follow-up, where's the comment question. In your own words, how ready do you feel you are in being able to write scenario-based questions? So in our choices again, good, okay, or bad. How many think this is good? How many think it's okay? And how many people think it's bad? Okay. This is my question. So I thank you all for raising your hands early. It can be improved. All the questions can be improved. So you have to have some humility about that. You probably saw, those of you who didn't like it, you probably saw some really important things you could improve. That's what we need to be doing. But I like this one because it's got granularity. It's also tailored. The other ones I showed you before were written in a generic sense. The more precise you can make things, the better data you're going to get. So this is about a particular course, a workshop that I teach. I like this question because I want them to be able to, tell me whether they can do C versus D. Really critical. And also the open-ended response. This is what I call a hybrid question, forced choice, then open-ended. I wouldn't do this on all your questions because you'll overtax your respondents, but on a couple key things, really, really valuable to do forced choice and open-ended. All right, so that's it for performance-focused smile sheets, except for putting them into perspective. There's a bunch of things I didn't have time to talk about. I didn't have time to talk about the standards, how to put the standards on the questions. I didn't talk about delayed smile sheets, delaying them. I typically recommend 2 to 4 weeks. I didn't talk about how to turn these data into numeric data. I didn't tell you about how to write the questions, et cetera. But there's a lot there. Again, my goal today is to get you, if you're interested, to be curious, to go read some more. All right, so the LTEM. So LTEM is a 1-page model and a 34-page report that goes along with it. I created this, but I got a lot of help. You can see this is some of the, greatest minds in our field. A lot of great feedback to make it better. It's gone through 12 iterations. So, at one point it was a 14-level model and then a 15-level model. It got ridiculous. So people gave me good feedback about that. In fact, I took it to a ISPI learning design thinking conference and got feedback and made it better. I introduced it here last year, right before it was publicly released. The Actually, the anniversary of this release is tomorrow. It's going to be 1 year when I made the official one, but I introduced it a little bit before, and then I made it better based on your feedback. So let's start with the first question. Why do we need a new evaluation model? Well, you saw that the dominant model, the Kirkpatrick itself 4-level model, has some chinks in its armor. We saw all the frustration over the years. We saw that we think we should be doing better. There's a bunch of mistakes that we make. Too many of our learning evaluation focuses on these sort of very low-level things. So we obviously can be doing better. So note the subtitle, Sending Messages to Enable Learning Effectiveness. So that's sort of the focus here. When I created the model, I wanted it to nudge us in good directions. All of our models, in fact, let's take a look at this. ADDIE's a famous model in our field, right? It sends messages. All models send messages, all practices send messages. Let's take a look. So assessment. ADDIE sends the message to us that we should do some serious assessment before we actually design and develop. That's a good message. It sends a message at the end. We should do some serious evaluation at the end. That's a good message, but it's a bad message too, in the sense that we shouldn't just be evaluating at the end of the process. We should evaluate during design and development, et cetera. Another bad message that the ADDIE model sends is it's a start-to-stop process. But we know it really should be iterative. We should be thinking about this as an iterative process. So it's one of our models. It sends good messages. It sends bad messages. Ideally, we want our models to send more good messages than bad messages. They should be useful. So let's look at the 4-level model. Some beneficial messages. Don't just focus on learning, focus on results too. This is phenomenally important. I'm a believer that because this model was so dominant in the field and because this is one of the most important messages it sent, it helped our whole field evolve from one focused on the classroom to one focused on performance. It wasn't the only source of that transition, but it was a big one. Learner opinions are not most important. It puts opinions of learners down at level 1, sending the message that they're not that important. Some harmful messages sent or missed being sent. It does not warn us against ineffective evaluation practices. We do things like measure completion rates, butts in seats, these kind of things. The model, the 4-level model, is silent on those. It ignores the role of remembering. We as learning designers not only have to help learners understand what they've learned, we also have to support them in remembering, okay? The 4-level model is silent on that. Also, the level 2 in the 4-level model is mashed into one bucket, all different types of learning assessments. So we could be measuring things like trivial information. Can you regurgitate it? We can be measuring, can you remember or understand some basic concepts? We can be measuring, are you able to make decisions? Can you actually do the task that we're doing? There's a continuum there from good to bad, but what do? We look at it, we say, oh, we need a level 2 assessment. And what do? We tend to default to the easiest, lowest level and focus on knowledge, which is not that critical. Okay, so good messages, bad messages. In the report that goes along with the model, I go into a lot of detail about the 4-level model and the messages that it sends. I also go into detail about the messages that the Eltham model sends. So Eltham model is one-pager. The colors aren't quite right on this projector, but this is sort of reddish, this is yellow, and these are green at the top. Yeah, the projector's completely got it wrong. But that's fine, because one thing I've learned is that, in some cultures, red is bad. In some cultures, red is good. So, but that's what I was thinking. So we'll go through it one at a time. Attendance, tier 1. And by the way, I call them tiers, so not to confuse them with the 4-level model. Attendance, learner signs up, starts, attends, or completes a learning experience. And notice the small blue print. A metric inadequate to validate learning success because learners may attend but not learn. Okay, also levels of learner activity. They can do all these things. They can have attention, interest, and participation, but they still may not learn. Okay, so these are inadequate. Tier 3 is learner perceptions. That's what we've got here. We can have traditional smile sheets at Tier 3B. The learner is queried in a way that does not reveal insights on learning effectiveness. And Tier 3A, learner is queried in a way that reveals insights about learning effectiveness. 4, knowledge. And again, these are yellow in the, in the model. Well, it doesn't matter. All right, so Tier 4 is knowledge, and we can ask questions about facts and terminology, knowledge retention during or right after the learning event, or retention after several days or more. Notice that this gets the distinction between understanding and remembering. So now let's go to the good levels. Decision-making competence. Notice it has the distinction between understanding and remembering. Learner makes decisions given relevant, realistic scenarios. Task competence, learner performs relevant, realistic actions in decision-making. And again, it has the distinction between understanding and remembering. Now, the distinction between 5 and 6 is very interesting and a bit subtle. So let me give you an example. I was in the leadership development field. One of the things we taught, one of the learning points we tried to get across was that you as a manager should bring your direct reports into decision-making to increase their buy-in, to get their good ideas, et cetera. That was a principle we would teach. If I gave them a scenario-based question to assess that, I could see if given a scenario, they would do that. They would decide to bring people into decision-making. What I'm not seeing there is the actions they would actually take, the words they would actually use, the tone of voice they would use, the body language they would use. If I had done all of those together, the decision-making and the actions, that would be a Tier 6 competence. Tier 7 is transfer, when learners use what they learn to perform work tasks successfully, as clearly demonstrated through objective measures. And the effects of transfer. So this is, and note here, this is including outcomes affecting learners, coworkers, family, friends, organization, community, society, and the environments. You don't necessarily need to focus on all those, but it's nice to have them pointed out because sometimes we think only in terms of the effects on the organization. And certainly, I think, it's sort of a bigger picture, a more ethical picture if we think about the effects on learners, et cetera. So just hinting, nudging in that direction. And notice here that these are the tiers where we're actually going to certify somebody has competence. Okay, so remember decision-making competence, adequate to certify decision-making competence. These are things that give us a good idea that people on their way to actually transferring learning and getting the benefits of it. So this is work performance. Just to be clear, 7 and 8 are work performance. Performance and learning is 6, 5, and downward. So everybody wants to know, ask me this question, how does this compare to the 4-level model? All right, so you can see level 1 reaction is same as Tier 3 learner perceptions, although in the Eltham model, we've made a distinction between focus on effectiveness, focus on satisfaction, reputation. Notice that the 4-level model is silent on the inadequate measures here, activity and attendance. This is the big advantage, I think, of the Eltham model, and it distinguishes between knowledge, decision-making competence, and task competence. We want to encourage ourselves to get people to be able to do tasks and make decisions, not just regurgitate knowledge. And then 3 and 4 are there. You'll notice that there's some more distinctions in here than just major labels. So that's just a differentiation. But the big question is, how do you use this? Right? So I'm going to give you 2 examples, but I know there are others. It was only released last year, but people were already doing dissertations on this. So people are thinking about this seriously. So we can assess our evaluations. We can see this as a map, right? Where are we now? Where do we want to go? We know gap analysis. That's one of the things we talk about in the field. Okay, so right now we are doing traditional smile sheets and we're measuring attendance or completion. Maybe later this year we'll bump it up to a performance-focused smile sheet. We'll use some scenarios to measure decision-making competence. Maybe in 2020, we'll measure transfer on some of our highly strategically important courses, and we'll do effects of transfer as well. So where are we now? Where can we be going? To motivate ourselves. Second way we can do this is we can work backwards from our goals. So let's say we want our sales to increase by 5%. We've followed the ADDIE model. We've done some really good assessment, and we've figured out that if we can get our sales managers to coach their sales reps better, that will be able to increase that. So we'll have some way of measuring whether our managers are coaching better. We'll use the Delta coaching diagnostic or whatever, or we'll ask their direct reports how they're doing, 360-degree kind of feedback. During learning, we'll have a simulated coaching exercise. We'll have a rubric, and we'll measure people on their coaching ability. We might give them some decision scenarios. This person's doing this type of coaching, this kind of situation. Are they doing it well or not? Maybe we'll have some if-then decisions. So given this type of coaching issue, what kind of coaching approach should we use? That would be knowledge. And then we could use some performance-focused questions. Now, it doesn't mean we can't do these other things. We just can't use these other things to validate our success. Okay? There's some very important reasons to measure attendance, et cetera, to look at activity, et cetera. There's other reasons to use Eltham. This person I'm working with who's doing their dissertation on it is using Eltham model to get a hospital, the learning team at the hospital to think differently about their learning in general. So you may have other ideas about how to use it. So some key Eltham messages, and I'll just let you skim through these. But the first one is the same as the 4 level. The other ones I think are unique. So just, instead of me reading them, I'll let you skim. I notice a lot of you are wasting your SD card space on your phones. Again, if you can take one picture, the last slide will have the URL on. Okay. All right. So, any quick questions on this? I know it's a lot. Yeah. So the question is, how do you use the model with modern technologies? Well, you're still measuring the same things. It doesn't really matter what learning modality you're using. You can still measure the same things. Now, I will say that measurement technology is improving. And so there are opportunities to measure some of these things. So for example, one of the new tools out there is sort of a digital mobile coaching, right? So you train people on, perhaps you train people on a skill, and then they're supposed to take it back to their jobs. And they will then use their phone to take a picture or show the actual task that they're doing. That task can then be sent to their manager or coach to give them feedback on it. We can become part of that process as well. So we can utilize some of that. There's some extra opportunities to do that. What else? Yeah.
What about comparing programs? So
Comparing one program to another?
yeah, so you're talking about making questions quite sort of specific. How would you
Oh, okay. So the question is, if you tailor your questions to the specific program, then you're not getting really comparison across programs. So a couple ways to think about that. One is we can have some questions that are the same. However, I'm a little bit skeptical of that because you can ask the same question of a program that teaches how to use PowerPoint versus how to deal with sexual harassment. And they're so different, right, that you can't really compare them because there's so much going on there. So I'm suspicious that using the same questions really gets you comparison on some of those things.
thinking about programs that are in the same sort of knowledge domain?
Okay, so that might work. But again, and one thing to keep in mind is let's not just do these things. If we really want to compare, we can use other metrics as well. Let's measure their ability to remember. Let's measure their decision-making competence, et cetera. Yeah. I can't hear you.
Sorry, to me this feels like, makes quite a lot of sense in terms of data interpretation. So if you are using something that is kind of
We've got a speaker, microphone at the back.
Oh, magic.
I was just saying, to me, it feels like it makes sense in terms of data interpretation. So I guess people are using learn analytics or thinking of taking that up. Quite often the issue is, you know, what do I want to measure and how can I get that really rigorous, maybe right from the start. So, and then afterwards, it's looking actually what's measured and is that really of any use and what kind of stories does that tell? So this to me it seems to be ticking a box in terms of maybe planning quite adequately
Well, that's,
ahead of
yes.
your quantitative data measurement, as it were, and then in effect this creates a qualitative assessment.
Well, thank you. And I you know, in the short time I have, I'm not sure I emphasize this enough, but this is a way, you should not just do evaluation at the very end. We should be thinking about evaluation from the beginning as a way to get us to focus on the right things. So absolutely. Okay, I noticed the time, and I promised Stella I would have ended 2 minutes ago. Let me just highlight a couple things. I was gonna, so this, I'll just give you the quick thing here. The Net Promoter Score asks people about the reputation of the course. This is very similar to what we used to do, asking about the satisfaction, so that has no added benefit. I don't like the Net Promoter Score for training, and I'll give you a link to that. This one is one of the biggest lies in learning evaluation. We can't really do this. And typically, and so if we ask questions about learner perceptions, and we say, did you learn more knowledge? Are you better able decision-making competence, do task confidence? Are you going to transfer this? That's still a tier 3 kind of discussion. It's not a tier 7, 6, 5. And it's the same, there's the article there. And there's the same thing with the 4-level model. If we ask questions about learning behavior and results to the learners, that's still a level 1 reaction. Okay, so I was going to ask you some questions, but I'll skip these. And I know you would have got them right. Let me just end with this. So what I'm encouraging us to think about is a sort of more muscular approach to evaluation by using this notion of messaging. You should have seen this theme in both of the things I talked about. Performance-focused smile sheets can send messages about what's important. It can nudge our behavior and the behavior of our stakeholders in the right direction. The same with the Eltham model. It's about the messaging, nudging us in better directions than we've been nudged in the past. So it helps us make our most important decision and get the resources we needed. There's a bunch of links here. And just go get the main link here, which is right there. Okay, so. Sorry, Stella.
No, that's all right. Just before you thank Will, because I do want you to thank Will, I want to find out what decisions you've made about this session and what you're going to do, or not what you're going to do, I want you to be thinking about something you're going to do differently back at work. So I'm going to ask you whether you have a concrete plan to go back and do something already. I'm going to ask you whether you've got some sort of vague ideas that you're thinking of experimenting with, or whether you need more time to reflect and evaluate what you've just learned. So can I ask you if you already have, I'm definitely going back to work and I'm going to do something different. Will you please stand up? There you go, Will. That looks good.
This is our evaluation, by the way. Just saying.
It is indeed, and that's why I asked the question right at the beginning. No, stay standing, stay standing. If you have a sort of a vague notion that there's some things here you really think you need to go back and check, and you think you want to do something, stand up. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And if you think, I just need more time to reflect on this, to think about it, to process it, and possibly evaluate it, will you stand up? Fabulous. And now I would like you to thank Will very much for a fascinating, really important conversation.
Thank you very much. Great discussion. I do want to add one thing. I am beginning to think about building a tool to do some of this stuff. If your organization would like to be a beta test site, give me your card and I will get back to you. All right, so I'll hang out here for a few minutes. Thank you.
And enjoy your lunch.